Hey, it's Nerin here from Positively Sorted. We help busy small businesses to simplify their digital and admin workloads so they can outsource the tricky stuff, whether it's to us or someone else, and do more of what they love. Recently, I did a video about local versus overseas virtual assistants, and if you go back and have a look at that video, I talk about, I think there's a time and place for both. So while at the moment I'm all for local VAs because that's something that I'm doing and am able to do, but when you're first starting out, I think there's a time and a place for using cheaper overseas virtual assistants just to get you up and running. So you might be thinking about that, going, oh God, where do I start? How do I find an overseas virtual assistant? And there's a few ways you can do it. So I'll tell you a bit about what I saw when I was looking for mine, and the pros and cons of some of the different options. So what I saw as my two main overall options were looking on sites like Upwork, which is kind of like a job board. You can search and there are thousands of options of different types of virtual assistants, different expertises, different levels, different costs. So you can find a pretty cheap assistant on there, but for me, it was kind of like a needle in a haystack. It was a lot of just too many options and no real way of knowing how good they were going to be without a bit of trial and error. And there's going to be trial and error anyway, but it was all a bit daunting. So it was a bit more direct to that person that you were going to be working with. The other option this is what I went for a number of reasons, but there are actually a lot of virtual assistant agencies around now that they often have an office in Australia, so it's someone local that you can talk to, and that local Australian company that's invoicing you, so you're not having to worry about exchange rates or how to transfer money to somebody overseas. They handle all of that for you, and they also handle all of the HR stuff. So for me, that was a huge pro. Just because all I had to do was give them a list of the types of tasks that I wanted help with. And that's obviously the number one thing you need to know before you start, is what you need help with and about how many hours you think you need. So a VA agency was the main thing that I was looking at when I was looking to hire a regular overseas virtual assistant. And then once you narrow that down, there are a few main options within that. So there are different types of agencies that do things differently. The three main, how I sort of broke it down, was there are some that will set you up with a full-time assistant. So 40 hours a week, you're paying this, it's the same amount each month, but you need to have that volume of work to give to them. So with that option, it was a really good hourly rate. And the other thing you'll find with agencies is that the hourly rate sort of starts slightly higher than if you were to go direct, because they're taking their little cut out of it, but they're managing a heap in between as well. So it's worthwhile. So the pros of having a full-time 40-hour-a-week assistant are that you build that working relationship, working with them that amount of time. They become a proper team member, and they're 100% working for you. So they're always available to you. and you can set up routines and get more into a bit of a flow. Whereas if they were working partly for you and partly for somebody else, you'd sort of got to manage when they're available to you. But yeah, the cons on the other side of having a full-time assistant is the cost. And for me, the stress of finding enough work for them at that stage that I was at wasn't worthwhile. But it was a good option if you do have enough work. The hourly rate is pretty good. Another agency I found was a lot more flexible with what hours you could work with them. So I call this sort of the ad hoc. It could be, they did like you to sort of specify how many hours a week you wanted, but it could have been 5 hours a week, or it could have been more. And they had a sliding scale of the more hour, like certain brackets of, like, the more hours, obviously the cheaper the hourly rate, and the less hours cost a bit more per hour. But if that's all you needed, that was a nice flexible option. So the pros for that ad hoc is that it is more flexible and easier to start small, especially when you're just getting started. And it also wasn't a huge investment of dollars or time, for that matter. And the cons for that were more that you'd never quite, they were juggling work for other people as well, so you sort of had to give them stuff with enough time that they could fit it into their schedule. Also, yeah, it's a bit harder to get into a bit of a routine with working with somebody if it's less hours, and the hourly rate was higher for that. So then the third option for agency VAs was a part-time setup. So it might have been 20 hours a week or 10 hours a week. I think the guys I worked with at least were ideally 20 hours a week. And this is kind of that good in between, and this is where I ended up, because it was that, yeah, fit what I needed. So the pros for that option were you didn't have to have 40 hours worth of work for somebody to do each week. It wasn't as big a time investment, and it wasn't as big a dollar investment as far as price. And the price per hour was, as you'd expect, sort of a bit more than if you were going with full time, but less than if you were just going with the flexible sort of 5-10 hours a week. It was actually every day for 4 hours a day that I ended up working with my assistant. And so you have that, get into that routine, and you build that relationship working with the same person every day. I didn't need to stress about the money as much, and she was always available in those mornings. If something came up that day that needed to be done, I could go, here, can you do this right now? So that was a great advantage for me. Yeah, so that was what I ended up going with. If you're interested in who these companies were that I was talking to, because I spoke to a company, at least one company in each of those categories. If you're interested in who they were, give me a shout in the comments and I'll share them. But so they would invoice me each month. If I had any questions about the HR side of things, there was somebody specific that I could talk to. I didn't necessarily have to have uncomfortable conversations with my assistant straight up, especially being new to it. Communication is very important though. The other thing an agency sometimes gives you is that bit more of an eye on what somebody's doing. If you're new to working with an assistant, sometimes you might be worried about, are they doing what they say they're doing? They're in a whole other country. It's a bit daunting. So some of them, like the full-time ones that I spoke to, actually had an office that all the VAs go to that office and work for the day. So there's sort of a manager there keeping an eye on them, and they clock in and clock out. So it's kind of like a job for them. They're just in another country. And some also have so mine had it was an app that they used that took screenshots of their computer every however often, I can't remember. And I had access, so I could actually go in and have a look at those screenshots to see. I didn't do it very often, but you could see what was on their screen to see what they were working on. And they had a time tracking thing. They had to put what they were working on when and clock in and clock out still, but it was just remote. So my VA worked from her home, but she still was sort of logged into that agency's software so you could still sort of keep an eye on what they were doing. So that's another benefit if you're worried about that. So hopefully that gives you an idea of some of the different options that are out there for working with an offshore virtual assistant. There's probably heaps more out there now. It was about 12 to 18 months ago, as I'm filming this, that I was looking into it. So there's probably even more options and different ways of doing it now. But that was a fair range of options at the time still. So have a look. It is a bit of a task weighing up what's going to work for you. And I don't sort of say, this is the best way to do it, because it totally depends what's going to suit your situation, your budget, how much work you've got, the type of work you've got. And so, yeah. But if you have questions, definitely stick them in the comments below, and I'll answer as best as I can from my experience. And if anybody else has had any other experiences or done it a different way, please, I would love to see that too. Everybody else would be keen to get any extra input, I'm sure. So that's all for today. Thanks a lot. I'll see you next time.